Today, we're going to be talking about an imminent economic disaster that's coming. That's how I see it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this program. I am Dr. Chris Martinson here. Let's go here. This is my concern. I think there's this potential for a systemic economic, if not financial, collapse. Is that too strong of a word? Is that hyperbole? Nope. And let me make the case for you about why that is. So this is something you may not know about me if you've been watching my channel on COVID, is actually pre-COVID. I wrote this thing called The Crash Course. It's also a video series. There's a screenshot from that video series right there. And what it does is it connects three things. The three E's: economy, energy, environment. We have to look at all three now as a system. We have to look at all three together, because if you just burrow down and look in any one of these things, you're not going to get the right story. Federal Reserve, busy out there just looking at the economy and making stocks go higher, because that's what it really wants. It wants stocks to go higher, but it's completely ignorant of the idea that we live in a world that as we just cram our economy higher and higher by falsely throwing more and more claims into it, which is what we call currency or money, that we're creating other issues over there in the environment, obviously. There's no connection between those two for the Federal Reserve. Oh, we just need more growth and we need stocks to go higher. Why? When we see that birds, fish, soil, big trouble going on over there. Same thing on the energy front. That's what I want to talk to you about today. And of course, one of my personal all-time heroes in history, Leonardo Da Vinci, said it best. He's like, learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else. That's just how it is. And it's just everything is connected. So here's the one thing everybody needs to know, but you need to know about the economy. It's founded on a debt-based system of money that is itself, it's either expanding exponentially or it's busy collapsing. Those are its two states. It's either merely expanding or it's collapsing. So that's why the Federal Reserve is so addicted to this idea of we have to keep it expanding. By it, it's not really the economy. The Fed doesn't actually care about that. Doesn't care about you. Doesn't care about birds or bees. Doesn't care about any of that. It's in charge of protecting a system, and that system is a banking system, and the banking system is founded on a type of money, and there's lots of different types that we could use, but we've settled on one across the whole world, and it's debt-based money. Now, the Crash Course goes into this in pretty great detail, which you can find online. I'm not going to go into it too much, but we have to have this one definition so that we can have the next conversation, and it's this. What do we mean by money? It's actually currency. Our currency today doesn't really satisfy what I consider to be money. That's a distinction that Mike Maloney makes all the time. He makes it very well. Currency is one thing, money something else. Money should be a store of value. Currency is just something they just make out of thin air and just as much of as they want. But we'll call it money for now because that's what people call it. Just know that there's a distinction there that matters. Money, what is money? Why does money have value? You know, that if you take a $100 bill out, it's a piece of paper. Why does it have value? Well, it has value because you can exchange it for either a good or a service. What are goods? Things like cars, food, houses, planes, things like that. Or a service, which is people's time. You might buy a service from a lawyer, from a massage therapist, a therapist, or whatever. People's time are services. So that's what it is. Money only has value to me. That $100 bill only has value because I can go somewhere and do something with it. I can buy a meal at a restaurant. I can buy a car, a house, I buy a tractor, ammunition, whatever your story is. That's why it has value. So it's actually money is a social contract between us. It's an agreement that we hold. And it has value because the government says if I don't pay my taxes in it, they'll take my house, right? But money itself is a claim on real things, okay? So now we have to add one more thing to this particular story, which is I said we had a debt-based money system. So what's debt? Well, debt is a claim on future money. So like a mortgage. If I take out a mortgage, take $400,000 out to buy a house or something, I borrowed that $400,000, I get that currency right now, give it to the person who's selling the house, but then what do I have? Well, I have a house, but I also have a monthly string of payments I have to make for the next 360 months. right? So it's a stream of payments for 30 years if I took out a 30-year mortgage. So debt is a claim on future money. And what's future money? Well, future money is a claim on future stuff, goods and services, things like that. All right? So now that we understand that, now we can get to the nub of why I think there's a big problem that's going to surface this year, maybe within the next few months, and it is around this. So this is a chart that comes from the Federal Reserve, and it's very helpfully titled All Sectors, Debt, Securities, and Loans, Liability Level. What's that? This is all the debt in the system, just debt, not unfunded liabilities like Medicare that hasn't been paid and we don't know how it's going to get paid in the future. Forget that. This is just debt. Corporate debt, state debt, local debt, municipal debt, student debt, household debt, federal debt, just all the debt, right? Just an actual debt, like a auto loan is real debt. Okay, so when we look at this chart, you can see starting back in the 50s on up through current that we just have more and more and more and more debt. And again, what's debt? Debt is a claim on future money. First, same data. I've just put it in Excel here, and I've done a couple of things to it. First, I've plotted it out so that we can ask the question, how is that debt growing? Is it growing linearly? No, I'm glad you asked. It's not. It's growing exponentially. It's growing in a way where we get a curve shape like this, right? In the average doubling time since 1952 is every 8.8 years on average, that debt doubles. So, okay, so if we're constantly increasing debt in the system, Chris, why is that an issue? You know, what's the problem with that? Well, here's the problem. This chart of debt, as boring as it might seem, super important to how your life is going to turn out, super important to how the future is going to unfold. If you could understand this chart, you kind of get everything. So let me help you there. This chart is an explicit bet that the future economy is not just going to be larger, but exponentially larger, because it's growing exponentially. And if you're taking your claims on future money and growing them exponentially, we're counting on the economy to be exponentially larger. But here's the thing. Is the economy doubling every 8.8 years? And the answer is nope. Let's imagine that your credit card debt was doubling every 8.8 years. At a minimum, intuitively, very easy to understand, you would hope that your income is also doubling at the same rate. So it actually matters, the relationship, the proportion, the proportionality between the amount of debt you have and the amount of income that you have. So the income in this story is the economy, right? Because that's what we're setting the debt against, right? Money itself, measuring debt and income around just money is irrelevant, because the money only has value only because you can buy stuff with it. Where does that stuff come from? Well, that comes from this thing we call the economy. All right. Well, if our debt's compounding and doubling every 8.8 years, and our economy needs to grow that fast, how does the economy actually grow? So what do we mean when we say the economy? Well, you can imagine the economy as every single thing you look at in your household. Just cast around, just look around. You look at everything, right? You see everything. All of that stuff came to you because somebody somewhere produced something. Okay, those are the goods, right? And then the services. When you call up a lawyer who has 20 years of experience and tons of training, or a doctor or somebody who's got a specialist of some kind who has a lot invested in who they are and their expertise, you're paying for their service and all of that training they had. And then they have all of their goods and services they rely on. So that's the economy. It's just a bunch of people doing stuff. So what actually makes the economy grow, though? Because we constantly talk about it growing, but we never talk about how it grows. Well, let's talk about that. First up, we're going to go here. Economic output is intimately, and I mean intimately, linked to oil. In this chart, we can see up the y-axis, woo, when you want more GDP, we have to follow along the x-axis, and we see that, wow, every time we get more GDP, we're consuming more oil. So this is a snapshot in time. This is saying, as of today, how big is an economy, right? That's the y-axis. And how much oil are they consuming? That's the x-axis. So you see US, China, Japan, India. You can see the straight line there, right? You see the relationship? It's like there's no dots scattered off of this. So we don't have a single economy out there that's really massive but is using really very little oil, right? That would be a dot way down towards the bottom. And we don't have dots way off to the side. Like, it's pretty clear there's a relationship here. And of course there is. Think about everything. Again, look around your household, look at your desk, look in your living room, wherever you're watching this, right? Just look around. Try and imagine one thing that got there without oil being involved somehow, right? That big brown truck of happiness that rolls up and delivers the package, right? You know, with UPS is coming. Oil, right? Obviously. Anything that's manufactured, anything that's made out of plastic or has a plastic component, anything that got shipped across the ocean, anything that flew on a jet, oil was involved, right? So this, obviously, economic output is intimately linked to oil. What about over time, though? This is a snapshot. What if we went over time? This is what it looks like over time. Now we've switched the axis. Now we have energy up this y-axis here, and now we have economic output over time. So this starts when the world economy was a grand total of $30 trillion. It was way back here. Let me get my drawing tool out so we can all be sharing the same point of reference. So back here in time, the world economy in total was about 30 trillion at one point, and then it hit 35 trillion, you know, here, and then it hit, where are we? Let's see, here's 55 trillion here, and then it hit 65 trillion, and then it hit 75 trillion. It's much larger than that now. This is as of 2015, yep. So at any rate, what do we see here again? Now we see that over time, whenever the world economy got bigger, it consumed more energy. Now, this isn't just oil. This is primary energy. That includes coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear, hydro, and all alternative energies plus biomass. Every form of energy you can think of, all thrown into this one chart, measured in something called exajoules. It's a very large number of joules, unit of energy. At any rate, what do we notice on this chart over time? We notice that from 1980 to 2015, and by the way, it's still true today, that every time we used more energy, we got more economy, or every time we got more economy, we used more energy, that they're tightly linked. In fact, it's a flat line. In fact, there's no decoupling here. There's no like humans got better at making more economy with less energy, because if we did that, that straight line, that straight dotted line in there, you would see this other thing curve off. The data would curve off of that straight line. It hasn't. So very simply, we can say, if you want more economy, you are explicitly making the bet that you're going to be burning more energy. All you have to do in this story is understand the source of the real stuff, which is energy. This is the headwaters of the Nile in this story. You have to understand the source of the stuff and then marry that against the money printing, the debts, the claims, the fantasy promise paper tickets that are being arrayed against this. And then when you put those two pieces together, you go, oh, I get inflation now. Makes a ton of sense. All right. So let's look at total debt to GDP. So the debt on top in orange, in red below, is the income. So if this was your private personal credit situation, right, and your borrowing was constantly growing faster, pulling away from your income, you know that sooner or later you have a math problem, you have a financial problem, you have a bankruptcy problem, etc. You just get that. But somehow when we put it at the national level here for the United States, we're like, oh, it's not a problem, and they just kick the can down the road. Eventually, you run out of road, right? And that's where we're getting to in this story, and that's why when I said there's a potential for a financial or an economic collapse coming, it's because the collapse itself, it's not a collapse in stuff, because we'll still have plenty of stuff. The collapse is in the system of money and currency and debt that we're using to measure all this stuff against. That's where the trouble starts, right? So when you look at what happened, say, in Weimar Germany from 1918 to 1923, explosive inflation. What happened? Like, did the country suddenly not have stuff? No, it had the same amount of farmland. It had the same number of factories, the same number of people. Nothing happened except the currency system, the claims, those blew up. And that's, again, money is a social contract. Debt's a social contract. When that contract gets broken and that trust gets shredded, lots of things fall apart and it does get bad. That's Zimbabwe, that's Venezuela. Things, trust me, you don't want to mess with your currency system unless you're a moron or an idiot. Talking to you, Jerome Powell. That's what the Federal Reserve has been doing. And they've been enabling this behavior because this constant increase, exponential increase in debt, it keeps the system working today. And that's as far as their, they like their horses with the blinders and a wall in front of them. Like they just don't, I don't know what they're up to. I'd love to have a debate with them because what they're up to is really dumb. And they're going to keep being dumb until there's a forcing function that stops them. And you know what that's called? That's where we get to in this next part of the story, which is, where are we with the energy right now? Okay, so obvious question to ask. The right question to be asking right now is, are more oil supplies readily available today? I won't even talk about in the future and peak oil and all that stuff. Just today. Do we have enough oil to run the system so that we can at least pretend that all this debt accumulation makes some kind of sense? And the answer is no. And that was a legit oil shock. And it led to a double dip recession, 90 and 91, right? Because spiking oil prices and oil shortages, more than the price, it's the shortage of it. When you don't have enough oil, the price goes up, right? So that's what creates the shock. So oil shocks are very, very bad for economic systems, but they're really bad for over-leveraged systems that have too many promises outstanding. Thanks again, Federal Reserve. And other people like that. So at any rate, that's one measure. Here's another thing we could note is, well, we'll just get more oil out of the ground. We'll just open some spigots then, Chris. We'll just get more. The problem with that has been, this is energy capital expenditure within the oil business. And it has been, got to be honest, really unimpressive for a while. If this was the average sort of amount of expenditures, we'll call that, $80 billion-ish from 2000 through 2014. Well, from 2016 onwards, 2015-16 onwards, we're at less than half that. And the reasons for that are many. The price of oil wasn't high enough to support this. We had dangerously false narratives running around from what's called ESG, the environmental sustainability goals, things like that, that oil companies really were pilloried and saying, we don't want your oil. So they heard the message and they've been a little lackluster in their investment in this. At any rate, oil is a very long, slow sort of a business. If farming is a one-year cycle, hey, seems to be a little short on corn out there, I'll plant more. It's a one-year cycle. Oil's about a 5 to a 7-year cycle. It's much slower. So even if tonight oil went to $300 a barrel and every oil executive in the world said, let's get busy investing in more oil, it would take 5 or so years to undo this past 5 years of underinvestment, 7 years of underinvestment. It's not easily remedied. It takes time. So it's a longer, slower thing. And the way we detect it, oil is in structural short supply. How do we do that? Price. Price is easy. So oil exploded upwards recently. Crude oil, Brent, is over $110 a barrel at the time that I'm recording this. It's up 57% on the year. As they say in skydiving, or if you fall out of a building, it's not the fall, it's the stopping. It's never where you get is $110 oil unsurvivable? No, we survived it in 2013, right? It's the pace, though, of that change that's the hard part for systems. So it's a shock. We're in the middle of an oil shock right now. But it's not just an oil shock. We have a general commodity shock. So this is commodity spot index. It includes energy, but more importantly, it includes a lot of food. This is an absolute unbelievable shock to the system right here that's happening right now. And why is it happening? Oh, that's easy. The central banks printed, but the printing, that just increases the claims. It doesn't do anything to increase the actual supplies of things. Where do things come from? Oh, from energy. Fundamentally, even like food, food's going up. Where's that come from? Well, when you understand how industrial agriculture works, it mostly comes from oil and fossil fuels because obviously the fertilizer, running the tractors, harvesting, drying, storing, cooling, transporting everything. Food is just oils just all through that. Now fossil fuels are just buried all through that entire story. So when oil and fossil fuel goes up in price, food follows very, very quickly afterwards because it is an expression of oil in many respects. So we're seeing this massive, massive amount of inflation happening. So the central banks are caught right now. They're caught in a really tough moment. So what we're seeing with the central banks right now is that this problem that they're facing is one that they're going to have to work very, very hard to correct. So on the one hand, they have to control rising inflation. What does that mean? Well, they have to take some of this currency out of circulation. As they do that, that creates shocks to their precious stock market and bond markets, and then financial asset prices start to get hit, and then they get a little squirrely about the whole thing. And given the choice between ruining a bunch of middle-class households with rapidly rising prices or a falling stock market, that's an easy one. The Federal Reserve, every single time, and every central bank will always throw the entirety of, the 99% and under. They'll throw them right under the wheels of the inflationary bus every time because they're more concerned about the system of banking. And they've got a rationale for it. I know they have to go to sleep at night thinking they're good people, so they think to themselves, well, it would be bad because the stock market, when it falls, makes people lose confidence. When people lose confidence, then they don't spend as much. When they don't spend as much, all these people will lose their jobs. I'm really helping these people by making sure stocks stay up in price. In fact, sort of true, but really honestly, it just makes the cocktail parties they go to at Davos that much more friendly because they hate getting cornered by angry hedge fund managers going, what happened to my portfolio, Jerome? Makes people get cranky. So at any rate, what we're going to be seeing here as we go forward is a lot more inflation, and there's not a lot they can do about it because they're caught between a rock and a hard place. Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, they think, what would I rather have? A crash, get prices back under control, or a crash stock market. So they think that's the choice. Actually, it's not the choice. They're caught now because energy itself is its own federal funds rate or interest rate. Like there's nothing you can do. You can't print more or less and make more oil come out of the ground. It doesn't work that way, right? So we're going to see a lot of shocks coming. And by the way, this whole idea that we're in structural shortfall for oil has nothing to do particularly with Russia and Ukraine, except that's an afterburner on a story that's been slow cooking for a while because I already told you, right? See this multi-year failure to invest? That leads to statements like this from a variety of places. Like here's the head of Nasser, who's the CEO of Saudi Aramco, warns that world's spare oil supplies are falling rapidly. When was that? Well, that was October of 2021. Here's September 2021. The Chevron CEO warns of high energy prices and supply crunches. In December, we had another warning here from all the oil CEOs that were coming together for a meeting. The shale space down in the United States, we have Pioneer's CEO Sheffield warning U.S. shale is now unable to grow to meet this demand. This just comes to us from mid-February of 2022. So this has been going on a while. And all of these we've known about this. We have known about this, but it hasn't been really addressed in any serious way because guess what? Honestly, even if you want to address it, what are you going to do with a 5-year, 7-year delay cycle? It's tricky. So at any rate, that's what's been happening, but now we have afterburners on this story because if we take Russia's supply out of the mix, and this happening very, very rapidly, we're seeing traders all over the place not work with Russian firms. It's an astonishing collapse in anything coming out of Russia. And of course, the situation in Ukraine as of the recording here, which is on March 2nd, that's not going to resolve anytime soon. But nations agreed to release 60 million barrels of oil. Million. Sounds big, right? Well, actually, Russia exports, it's one of the largest exporters in the world. It exports 5 million barrels of crude a day. So if they stopped, that'd be 60 million divided by 5. 60 divided by 5 gives us about 12 days worth of Russian exports. So that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. And that's not a lot of buffer in this system. Well before we get to that 12 days, this 60 million barrels is going to be a blip. It'll bring prices down for a few days here, but we're going to see prices go back up again. How high? I don't know. But oil, could it be 200 a barrel? Sure. 300? Yeah. If it's 400, Chris, you wouldn't buy oil anymore. Yeah, I would. That's about how much at the pump equivalent they pay in Europe right now. Do they still put fuel in their cars? You better believe it. So yes, people will pay 400 and more per barrel. Trust me. So that's where we're potentially heading in this story. So here's how I wrap all this up right now. First, we have a massively over-leveraged system. It's just a massive failure to plan or think ahead on that. And that massively leveraged system, of course, as we learn, it all depends on oil to function, right? To make it make any sense at all, you need oil in that story. That oil is kind of in short supply. We see that in the price. I could show you all the supply-demand charts. There's tons of charts. I got lots of data. We're a little short on oil, and that oil is going to be really kind of tricky to replace anytime soon because we're short on investment, and that just takes a lot of time. There's nothing we can do about this in the near term, and there's nothing the Federal Reserve can do about this. They can print money and make stocks go up and pretend we're all happy, but the truth of the matter is your economy runs on oil, and we're out of it. We're short on it, and we don't have any quick way of making more of it quickly. And on top of all of that, we're facing the biggest energy shock in decades. Difference, this time we're doing it with a lot more of the leverage in the system. So start at the top of that wheel over there again. Whoop, nope, well, I got to get my sight. Yeah, start on the top of that thing over there. All right, so that's the whole system that we got running right there. Now, so was this hyperbole for me to say this, that we are facing a potential financial collapse of some kind or economic collapse? No, because it's grounded in the reality of the fact that the energy is the bottom of that economic pyramid. And on top of that economic pyramid, we have all these leverage bets. It's like an inverse pyramid. The energy is the actual wealth. The economy is how we turn that wealth into other forms of wealth. And then there are all these bets and claims that are stacked on top of that. That's the system we have on top of it right now. All right,